Thank you all for joining us tonight for the last lecture of the Nubian Month series. And we have the pleasure and honor to welcome Professor Arthur Obluski tonight to wrap up the session. However, this is not the last of events linked to the Nubian Month at ISAC, because we're going to do a community event and dance performance on Saturday the 30th from 1 to 4 p.m. For those who remember and follow regularly the program of the lecture series at ISAC, Arthur actually came a little more than a month ago, if I remember correctly. So we should just basically put you a Murphy bed in Breasted Hall. It's going to be, it's going to be easier. Professor Obluski will present tonight a lecture entitled "The Treasure Box Buried in Sand, Africana Byzantina from Nubia." For more than a century, archaeological research in Sudan has revealed some of the most remarkable treasures of African and global cultural heritage, a scholarly tradition closely associated with the University of Chicago and the pioneering work of James Henry Breasted. Over the past 6 decades, the archaeology of medieval Nubia has become a major field of expertise for the University of Warsaw. Within the framework of Nubian Month at the Institute for the Study of Ancient Cultures, this lecture surveys landmark discoveries that have transformed our understanding of Nubian societies between late antiquity and the Middle Ages, with particular emphasis on two historic capitals, Faras and Old Dongola. Drawing on key excavations and recent interdisciplinary research, it highlights spectacular finds from monumental architecture and urban landscapes to funerary evidence, inscriptions and painted decoration that illuminate religious change, political authority, and everyday life along the Middle Nile. Arthur Obluski is an archaeologist specializing in the study of medieval Nubia. He has been the director of the Polish Center of Mediterranean Archaeology, University of Warsaw, since 2018, having previously headed the PCMA University of Warsaw Research Center in Cairo. He advocates a change in the approach to archaeological research in Africa and in the Middle East, from considering it as a purely scientific endeavor towards using heritage to foster economic development of local communities and their active involvement in the research process. He received the first European Research Council grant in Poland in the field of archaeology in 2017, with the ERC starting grant from the project UMA, Urban Metamorphosis of the Community of Medieval African Capital City, followed by an ERC consolidated grant called Afropolis Tungul, Urban Biography of a Cosmopolitan African Capital, in 2023. In 2022, he received the Public Choice Award in the ERC Public Engagement with Research competition for sharing the results of his research through collaborative archaeology. His work at Old Dongola has been selected as one of the world's top 10 discoveries by Archaeology magazine in 2023. He was also awarded the Polish Prime Minister Award for Scientific Excellence. Arthur has received multiple grants from the National Science Center of Poland, as well as, among others, the Columbus Scholarship from the Foundation for Polish Science, held at the Institute for the Study of Ancient Cultures here at the University of Chicago. Since 2012, he is the head of the Castle Louise project, particularly the publication of the ISAC excavations at the Castle Louise Monastery in his capacity of research associate at the Institute for the Study of Ancient Cultures. He is, of course, coordinating the publication and excavations of Castle Louise, directed by George Scanlon under the Oriental Institute Nubian Expedition series, particularly the volume 15. I want to insist on Arthur's civil engagement, which is long-standing and consistent. From 2012 to 2015, he was the counselor to the Prime Minister in Policy Programming and Regulatory Impact Analysis Department in Poland. From 2008 to 2012, he was Deputy Director of the Civil Service Department at the Chancellery of the Prime Minister, also in Poland. And in 2007-2008, he was the Deputy Director of the European Territorial Cooperation and European Neighbourhood and Partnership Department at the Ministry of Regional Development. Arthur's commitment to education and student engagement is also permanent since 2015. He is the creator and organizer of the Kazimierz Michalowski Memorial Lecture Series at the Research Center in Cairo at the PCMA University of Warsaw, Egypt, in cooperation with the Ministry of Antiquities. This is, of course, something that I'm particularly sensitive to, considering that these lectures commemorate the life of the founder of Polish archaeological research in North Africa and in the Middle East. Eminent scholars, of course, deliver lectures related or paying homage to Kazimierz Michalowski's rich legacy. He also created the Polar program, which is the PCMA lecture series also in Cairo, that are lectures basically given in Polish and where foreign scholars associated with the research center can present the latest results of their research, or recently conducted field seasons or in-depth analysis of archaeological materials recovered or discovered by Polish expeditions. He also particularly attentive to undergrad and graduate student seminars, as the research center in Cairo offered between 15 and 20 scholarships each year for young researchers building their scholarly career. We all know how paramount and pivotal this moment is in an early career, particularly in our field. The seminars help to achieve their goals by discussing their topic of interest, research, and career advisory. The professional service of Arthur is outstanding and very demanding. He celebrated the 60th anniversary of the PCMA University of Warsaw at Old Dongola, Sudan, held under the theme Old Dongola Heritage Community Archaeology in September 25. An exhibition accompanying the event at the University of Warsaw Museum was basically accompanied by lectures on Old Dongola and a discussion panel entitled Together for Sudan, Safeguarding Heritage in Times of Crisis were particularly remarkable. He also organized and hosted with the University of Warsaw the 15th International Conference for Nubian Studies in September 2022. In 2012, he integrated as a board member the International Congress on the Archaeology of the Ancient Near East, or ICANE. Arthur has always been a consistent and strong advocate for cross-Atlantic cooperation. I'm just going to mention a few examples of the major collaborations he started with the US, with David Reich at Harvard Medical School on investigations of medieval Nubian DNA, with Michel Buzon at Purdue University on investigation of stable isotopes on medieval Nubian communities, or with Angelika Lovasser at the Wadi Abu Dam Itinerary Project with the Institute for Egyptology and Coptology at the University of Münster, Germany. Arthur was obviously the perfect wrap-up for the Nubian Month lecture series as we head towards the 16th International Conference for Nubian Studies in September 2026 in Munich. And as such, ISAC wanted to invite Arthur in his capacity as president of the International Society for Nubian Studies, or ISNS, a tenure he holds since 2018, in a brilliant fashion, if I may add. In that scope, he was appointed by the National Corporation for Antiquities and Museums, the NCAM, to form the Sudan Cultural Emergency and Relief Fund, or SCURF, a small task force that has been working with the Sudan Antiquities Service to assist with recovering from the losses to museums and cultural heritage in Sudan since the recovery of Khartoum by the Sudan Armed Forces in March 25. The task force is directed by Geoff Emberling and is composed of Ikhlas Abdellatif, Ikhlas Elias, Maria Gatto, Angelika Lovasser, and Séverine Marchi at the head of the French unit. Their efforts have been focused on 4 distinct areas: assisting with museums, cataloging, combating antiquities trafficking, and monitoring archaeological sites, all particular sections that you were able to discover throughout the lectures during this Nubian month. Before I conclude this last introduction to the Nubian Month lecture series, I'd like to take a second to express my gratitude to the ISAC Museum team, and particularly the Education and Programs Department, for the organization and logistics of the Nubian Month events. Apart from these lectures, we also programmed field documentaries every Friday, community events around Sudanese food and music, as well as dance performances like Sermet and Ravel that's going to happen on Saturday, alongside workshops on Sudanese contemporary art that is displayed in the galleries. None of this could have happened without the dedication and support on a daily basis from our security staff headed by Victor Cruz, covering the galleries and all the events every 2 days, in effect offering the best experience to our audience and an heartfelt homage, concrete, to our Sudanese friends and colleagues that can be here today and risking their lives on the ground. As a conclusion, with the track record of Professor Obluski, we here have a testimony of 6 monographs, 7 book chapters, and more than 25 articles, demonstrating that Arthur is a pillar of our discipline and a leading international scholar on the question of cultural heritage preservation in crisis. Fervent partisan of international collaboration, he is an ISAC alumnus, but first and foremost, a dear friend, with passionate commitment in supporting colleagues on the ground. Please join me in welcoming Arthur to the stage.
Thank you very much, Mark, for this introduction. I'm really moved, but I was afraid that you are turning it into a lecture about me. I would like to express my thanks, of course, to Mark, team, and for the introduction. And I would like to congratulate ISAC for this amazing initiative on Nubian Month. It resonates not only in the US, but all over the world. So it was a great idea and even better implementation of this idea, Mark. And I promise that I'll deliver the book. I promise publicly to deliver the book on carceral release this year. Before I start my lecture, I would like to, if you allow me, to dedicate this talk to the late Sheikh Babikir Khalifa from the village of Gaddar, with whom we have cooperated for
can see you on Zoom.
Okay. We don't have to turn the audio on, no. Okay. Sheikh Babikir Khalifa comes from one of the most renowned Nubian families, the Suwar Dahab family, who originates from Dongola. One of his ancestors, Suwar Dahab, Muhammad ibn Salih, was the first Qadi, the first Islamic judge in Dongola in the 17th century. One of his cousins was the only military general that I know that organized coup d'etat in Sudan in 1981. He promised to pass the power and authority after the democratic election to the new government, and he kept his word. He was probably the only one in the world. So, and Sheikh Babikir Khalifa, unfortunately, passed away 2 days ago. So, the first part of my of my talk will be dedicated to short introduction to history of Nubia, because as well as geography of Nubia, because there are certain events that are quite important, not only for, I would say, not only for history of Nubia and Sudan, but also for world's history. So the time span under consideration is between the 4th and 14th century during my lecture, and at that time, in the late 4th century, sure?
Okay.
No audio. Yeah. The Meroitic Empire that spread in more or less over the entire territory of modern Sudan collapsed, and three new kingdoms emerged in the Nile Valley between first and sixth Nile Cataract, and even farther south in the region that we call Middle Nile Valley. So starting from the north, we have a laser pointer. Yes, from the first to the third cataract, there was the kingdom of Nobadia, with the capital city of Faras, where Polish excavations in Sudan started in 1961. And then further south was the kingdom of Makuria between third and more or less somewhere between fifth and sixth Nile Cataract. We don't know the exact where the border was exactly located. With capital city in Old Dongola, or known in indigenous Old Nubian language as Tungul, where I have a pleasure and honor to excavate together with our Sudanese colleagues. And further south from this, let's say, frontier between fifth and sixth cataract was the kingdom of Alwa. According to Arabic sources, the wealthiest of all Nubian kingdoms, with capital city in Soba. Soba was first excavated by Peter Shini, then by Derek Welsby from British Museum, but recently the Polish team took over also excavations also at this Nubian capital. The southern border, the extent to the south of the Kingdom of Alwa is not well known. Probably it reached as far as Sud Dams along the White Nile, and then it bordered with the Kingdom of Aksum and then Kingdom of Ethiopia in the south east. I would like to talk a little bit about some at least two important events in history of medieval Nubia or late antique Nubia. The first is conversion to Christianity. According to Byzantine sources, Nubia was converted by two missions sent to competing missions, actually, sent by Emperor Justinian and his wife Theodora. But to be honest, I do not believe in this story because there are too many fantastic events. For instance, that the Dukes of Thebaid, the governor, the Byzantine governor of Egypt, stopped a mission sent by the emperor and allowed a mission of his wife to reach Nubia faster. I doubt if he would dare to do that. What I would like to stress out here, that in my opinion, Christianization of Nubia is a conscious political and religious decision made by the kings of Nubia. All of these three kingdoms converted somewhere around the middle of the 6th century, and in my opinion, they made this decision to be involved in the networks of exchange with the Mediterranean world. They didn't want to be kept outside, treated as barbarians, and so on and so on. And it was not only the trade networks that they got involved into, but also networks of exchange of ideas and innovation. The next important, so they spread Christianity deep into the African territory. Of course, Africa is an amazing continent because despite the fact that all the monotheistic religions are quite strict about their regulations, both Islam and Christianity in Africa is a kind of a syncretic religion that incorporates also local traditions, and Nubia, medieval Nubia was not different. So we now move fast forward, let's say, to the 100 years later, to the mid-7th century. Let's say that we are now in year 641, just after the Arab tribes conquered Egypt and half of the Byzantine Empire, Syria, Palestine. They reached the territory of modern Turkey and were at the brink of conquering the northern Africa as well. They tried to conquer Nubia as well. They organized two expeditions, one in 641, the other one in 652, and both of these expeditions were not successful. The Nubians were able to rebuff Arab invasions while the Byzantine Empire fell to them. So it stopped the spread of Islam in this part of Africa for the next 700 years. Nubians, actually the king of Makuria, signed a peace treaty, an economic treaty with the Arabs that lasted 700 years. And it could have probably lasted longer if not the activities of the king of Makuria himself, but I will talk about it a little bit later. By the end of the 7th century, Nobadia, the most northern kingdom, and Makuria merged into one kingdom. They formed a kingdom which was as big as, I mean, in terms of territory, it was as big as Spain and France combined. And then in late 11th, maybe 12th century, we don't know the exact date, Makuria and Alwa merged into even larger political organism, which was probably as big as half of Europe at that time. In the last quarter of the 13th century, Nubian kingdoms start to decline. It was quite a steep decline, but I will talk about it a little bit later. And the kingdom of Makuria in the 14th century transforms into kind of a city-state kingdom that spread 300 kilometers downstream from Dongola and about 200 kilometers upstream from the third cataract to the to the fortress of Deiga that was located somewhere here. So after this, let's say, abbreviated version of history of medieval Nubia, I would like to take you to Old Dongola. You have a drone movie that shows you Old Dongola. Here, as the pointer, here are two big churches that we excavated in 1960s and 70s. The city itself reached as far as here. And here you can see some white buildings. This is the monastery on Com H. This building is a church that was converted in 1317 into a mosque, and this is the oldest preserved mosque in Sudan.
I'm sorry, these are... Share.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why it was interrupted.
Okay, let's.
Is it sharing? Is paused? Why is
Maybe this one.
No, share
No.
screen too. Share.
And share. Maybe you should. Yeah.
Why is it paused? Maybe
So-
you hit something by
No,
share.
maybe let's stop sharing and restart it.
Okay, share
Mm-hmm.
and screen too.
Screen two. Sure.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
thank you. I'm very sorry.
Participant.
about
No, it's okay. It's okay. Archaeologists are good in problem solving, you know, because we have to do it every day in the field. So on the left of the screen, you have a kind of sketch map of Old Dongola, which was one of the, I would say, biggest cities in medieval world. It was about 200 hectares in size. It spread along the Nile for about 4 kilometers. The very heart of the city was a part that I call a royal city, which was filled in only with churches, palaces, and elite buildings. North of it, there was a zone that I call ceremonial zone with 2 large churches where probably king met with inhabitants of the city and inhabitants of the kingdom. One of these churches was claimed to be the Cathedral of Old Dongola, the Church of Granite Columns. Along the Nile, there was industrial zone when we identified production of pottery and iron. This part of the settlement was kind of modern American suburbs where there were a lot of townhouses, so probably a richer part of Dongolese community lived here. At the fringes of the city, there were at least 2 monasteries, maybe more. We are going to visit the monastery on H today. And so from more or less this line starts the eastern desert. There was a very narrow, let's say, area between the Nile and the desert. And in the desert, communities of Dongola located their cemeteries. These are really vast cemeteries. If you consider that this city was inhabited, let's say, from the beginning of the 5th or even 6th century until mid-20th century, so you can imagine how many people had to be buried here. The southern part of settlement that has not been yet excavated was probably inhabited by less wealthy part of Nubian Dongolese community. Okay, I think we already seen this movie, so we can watch another one. Here we have, so on the left it's fading away. There was a church of granite columns that was claimed to be the cathedral, and here we have an amazing monument that is so-called cruciform church because of the shape of it. It was probably built in early 9th century, and it was a commemorative building built by King Zacharias of Makuria after his son returned from diplomatic mission to Caliph of Baghdad. Because the Nubians were not happy with conditions of their economic and political treaty with the Arab world and Islamic world, so Zacharias sent his son to renegotiate, and upon his successful return, he built this amazing church. It was excavated in 1970s, but we re-excavated it in order to facilitate development of tourism at the site. Here we have the reconstruction of this building. It was about 21 meters high. For the sake of comparison, you have a human figure that is 2 meters tall here, standing just next to our reconstruction. Now we'll move to the monastery on H, which was a Cenobitic monastery. This means a communal monastery where monks lived together. But there was one hermitage. One monk spent time in the solitude. Here was his hermitage. The name of the monk was Anna. But we have problems because probably some names that we consider to be masculine were used for women in medieval Nubia and the other way around as well. So Saint Anna This monk later was venerated as Saint Anna, and this place was turned into kind of pilgrimage center. Here we have the Catholicon, the main church of the monastery. Here is one other church, late church, 13th century. We haven't fully excavated this monastery, but we know that the monks' cell, the dormitory of the monastery, was located here. Here was the dining room, so a refectory of the monastery. But the most intriguing part of this huge monastic complex is not the monastic part itself, but two annexes that were added to the monastery. The so-called southwestern annex was probably devoted to women, because all the visitors' inscriptions that were written on the walls of this complex were written by women only. And we have also some wall paintings that I'll show you soon that may also indicate that it was kind of a women establishment. And this big complex here was a commemorative complex that with several crypts and also amazing wall paintings. Here is the reconstruction that we did. The monastery, as usual in Christian world, was surrounded by vast cemeteries. You can see some reconstruction of some tombs. And what is quite intriguing is the fact that Nubians patterned the superstructures of their tombs on church architecture. When you look, for instance, at this tomb, it looks exactly like a Nubian church, which is quite interesting, and it allows us to reconstruct some of the churches that have not preserved the upper parts. This is another reconstruction. One of the major Polish discoveries in this commemorative complex was the crypt of Archbishop Georgios of Dongola, who was known for his philanthropic activities for the communities of Dongola. But for us, he's better known as the owner of the crypt that is densely filled, as you can see, with inscriptions. These are apotropaic inscriptions that aimed to protect the soul of Archbishop of Dongola on its travel to heaven. There are a lot of text, as you can see. Some of them, if I can mention, are incipits, so the opening phrases, opening paragraphs of Gospels. Here at the bottom left, in the bottom left-hand corner, you have the incipit of Gospel of Mark, and something that is closer to magic than, let's say, faith and religion, the famous Sator Square that was also widely used in Byzantine magic as well. Those texts has been already published by my colleague Adam Whiter and Jacques van der Vliet. Here is a sneak peek into the annex, northwestern annex in the monastery on Com H. Unfortunately, there are no wall paintings in this photo, but you can see kind of a bench, and you can see how it was formed. It was formed as some kind of a bed, let's say. So we think that maybe this annex was also used as a xenodocheion for incubations to heal people. To the incubations or some healing activities in this annex lead us also the wall painting that we have on the left here. And I got a question to you. What strikes you in this wall painting on the left? First on the left, not on the right. This is the story of a miracle of Jesus performed in Palestine at the Siloam Pond when Jesus healed a blind man. So what strikes you in this picture? Nothing? I can't hear from here. Yes. So if it was supposed to be, let's say, literary depiction of the miracle of Jesus, this person should be a Jew, not a Nubian. Yes. But Nubians were not quite. They were simply creative in terms of art and wall paintings. And of course, we can probably devote one other lecture, dedicate one other lecture to semiotic meanings of this wall painting. But for me, let's say, to cut the long story short, the most important thing is that the Nubians probably wanted to show how close Jesus is also to their communities, because we need to bear in mind that Nubians, of course, converted to Christianity, but it was completely alien religion, yes? And Christianity is deeply embedded in Jewish roots, so it was quite, something completely different from what they believed in earlier on. And on the right, we have another wall painting. I don't remember if I talked about it last time, but this is so-called a dancing scene with several figures, as you can see, dancing. But actually, when we were able to read the inscriptions, it turned out that this is a feast dedicated to easy delivery of king's nephew, because the throne inheritance in Makuria, but we think that in all Nubian kingdoms was matrilineal, so it was not the son of the king who inherited the throne, but the son of his sister. And here are some close-ups of those dancing figures. You can see that they wear completely different clothes, and the person on the right has some, let's say, I would say, Near Eastern attire, while the other person has typical, if not, I would say rather stereotypical African attire. He wears a mask, in my opinion. So there is also a question if this depicts the Nubians or maybe some other people who prayed for easy delivery of the successor to the Makurian throne. One other amazing wall painting that comes from the southwestern annex, this dedicated to women, is this depiction of Virgin Mary. I dare to call it Virgin Mary multitasking, because when you look at her, so the Nubians merged two theological meanings into one picture. First of all, we have Mary Galactrophusa, breastfeeding. Here is Jesus kneeling on Mary's lap and sucking her breast. But at the same time, she's spinning. You can see here. She's spinning, and there is a kind of basket with wool or cotton here. So usually in Christian art, Mary is spinning during the Annunciation. So when Archangel Gabriel told her that she will become Mother of God, and we have also Mary breastfeeding Mary. But the Nubians tried to merge two of those meanings into one wall painting here. Here we have another depiction of Virgin Mary with Christ in her arms, but this is probably illustration to Gospel of Pseudo Matthew. So during the escape to Egypt, the Holy Family was starving, and Jesus asked one of the palm trees to bend over and offer some dates to them, what of course the palm tree immediately did. But what is, and this scene has no parallels in Christian art anywhere else in the world. What is also important, it proves that Nubians read not only canonical books, yes, they didn't read only New Testament and Old Testament, but they also read apocryphal books, in this case, Gospel of Pseudo Matthew. Now we'll turn to some archaeology. This is the image that shows results of our ground penetrating research at the royal city in Dongola. You can see some streets running here, some houses, and so on. So I think it was in 2020, we looked at it, and this was the Ummah project mentioned by Mark, which was aimed at transition from Christianity to Islam in Old Dongola and, let's say, early modern period in the biography of the city. And you see, all of those structures are quite clear, but we were looking for mosques, because according to historical sources, especially Turkish traveler Evliya Çelebi, there were supposed to be 6 mosques, if I remember correctly, and 8 madrasas, so religious schools, but we couldn't identify any of them from our GPR, the ground penetration image. So I kept in my heart the story that Bruce Williams once told me when Keith Seeley was excavating Kustul and Ballana. Maybe you don't remember, Bruce, but you told me once, Arthur, you know why Keith Seeley made such a great discovery? Because he discovered, vast elite cemeteries at the border between Egypt and Nubia, because he excavated when no one else wanted to excavate, because on the surface there was nothing. And he started excavations when there was nothing. So I kept these words in my heart. And we started in 2020, we started not from excavations of clearly visible structures, but we started to excavate this area. I expected that maybe if we don't see any mosques in the ground penetration radar image, maybe there was kind of a big city square where the Muslim community prayed after they converted to Islam. So we started excavations, but immediately we have found a church. We have found probably the biggest church in the entire Nubia by accident. So here you have a picture, a photo of an apse of this church. So the sanctuary of the church, it was 6.5 meters wide, the mouth of this apse, which it makes it actually the largest apse known in Nubia. We have found traces of some wall paintings, but in 2020 we didn't have funding to excavate it, so we just made a trial pit and then backfilled the apse. Here is, just to give you the scale of the size, to give you impression of the size of this church, here is our architect, Agnes, documenting the church. We have found some other wall paintings, but we haven't even cleaned them. We had to backfill. So here you have a row of standing figures, probably apostles, as they were usually painted inside the sanctuary of Nubian churches. Here in the background you can see an arch of a window. Here you can have also separation between two rows of bricks. So this window was about 2.5 meters tall. It's about 8 feet tall, I think. So we didn't have money at that time, but then we got a grant to excavate this church. And my idea was, because the church is quite big, and we knew that we have to dig at least 7.5 meters down, because this was the depth of our trial pit, to excavate the church. So I decided that we'll dig a trench along the walls of this church, to have some space to protect the walls, to build support, but also maybe in the future for some tourist movements around this church, and it will also facilitate building a shelter. So we started to excavate east to the church. Here you have the apse of the church. We identified some structures that were supporting the apse. In other parts of the church, we have found some evidence that at one point of time the church started to collapse. Maybe it was not very well built, so they built some kind of support. But southeast of the apse, we found a dome, kind of stepped dome that we excavated down to this level this year. Oh, I don't know what happened. Oh, okay. So this dome definitely do not belong to the church itself, because the pillars in the church are much higher than the dome. Based on parallels to Cathedral of Faras that was excavated by Kazimierz Michałowski in 1960s, we expect that this domed building could be the tomb of archbishops of Dongola, or maybe even the kings of Dongola, because Michałowski found similar domed structure east of the Cathedral of Faras, and it was a tomb of several bishops. So, but from here we need to dig down about 9 meters. This is the movie that was done by Adrian, who is sitting here at the upon completion of our last season in Old Dongola in late February 2026. We also were able to identify the staircase. Now we are diving about 7 meters deep into the church. It's a monumental staircase that is 12 meters long and 5 meters wide. Thanks to the excavations this year, we know that the eastern part of the church, as well as this part, southern part of the church, is preserved up to 11 meters. So we have to dig down 11 meters to expose this church. It's like, I don't know, 2 stories at least. So I make jokes that we'll have, let's say, a miniature Lalibela churches in Old Dongola. This is the staircase. There was a window from the staircase into the church. I'm sorry for some blurred parts of this movie, but we had to trim down the quality so we can have a look at it. I want to draw your attention to this area. Here are remains of an oil lamp and remains of what was burnt in the oil lamp. And we have, yes, 2 steps up from here, we have the same thing. The steps are not burned next to this place, so we expect that there were lamps that were suspended and they lit in the entire staircase. Okay, to give you an impression how tall the church probably was, at least the nave, Here we are looking from the western part of the nave into the sanctuary of the church. Here is the, let's say, tentative reconstruction of this church based on some comparisons with other churches in Nubia. So from this corner to that corner, there is 37 meters. If we add the depth of both apses, it will give us around 50 meters. So the church was 50 meters wide, and at least, as we know now, at least 60 meters long, which makes it's 3,000 square meters under the roof. I don't know when we will be able to fully excavate, if ever, this church, but we'll try to do that. For the sake of comparison, I tried to look for some modern parallels for my lecture, and this church is as big as the White House, without the western wing, of course. The new western wing. Thanks to the historical sources, we were able to, historical and epigraphical sources, we were able probably to identify the name of this church. It was the Great Church of Jesus. In Arabic sources called simply the Church of Jesus. According to them, it was the biggest, the Arabic sources, the biggest, the wealthiest church in entire Nubia. So the Mamluk army seized Old Dongola in 1276. I will talk about it a little bit later. And they looted the church. They claim that looted the church and took gold valued at about 5,000 dirhams and twice as much of silver. At that time, in in Mamluk Cairo, or maybe rather in Fustat, you could rent a palace for a year for 15 dirhams. So the value of gold and silver looted from this church would allow you to rent a palace in Cairo for 1,000 years, according to Arabic sources. So as I told you, we started to dig those trenches, and we found first the dome, and then next to the largest church of Nubia, we have found the tiniest church of Nubia. I spoke about it last time when I was in Chicago. This is our discovery from 2023, and this is probably the first moment in my life that I had first-person kind of Indiana Jones experience, because we were excavating 16th century flimsy house. When we stuck our heads into the hole in the floor of one of the rooms, we found those amazing wall paintings. This room, which is probably a prothesis room of one of the Nubian churches, is decorated with wall paintings that have no comparison in Christian art. You can see King David in the middle between Archangel Michael and Jesus. Here on the left we have Virgin Mary. There in the niche is Ancient of Days, probably according to the Gospel of Ezekiel, because he is painted with quite intense colors, and Jesus blessing on the right hand, on your right. So here are the paintings and inscriptions. The inscriptions suggest, so far scholars, nubiologists as we like to call ourselves, thought that this room that was located north of the sanctuary was dedicated to perform the Christian rite of pre-sanctified gifts. So if you have some leftovers from the offering from the Mass, you can use those offerings later on, for instance, to deliver the Holy Communion to someone who is dying. But based on these inscriptions, we can now claim that we have evidence that also the prothesis rite was performed in this room, so preparation of the offerings for the Mass. The most spectacular discovery in this room is this figure of Virgin Mary. So when we look at her, she doesn't look like Virgin Mary that we've seen before or we see every day, because usually Mary is depicted with Christ in her arm, or maybe she's standing at the feet of the church, of the cross where Christ is crucified. She is holding a cross, which is attribute of the martyrs, usually in Christian art, and the book, which symbolizes usually some, let's say, Christian scholars and knowledge. So I couldn't believe that this is Virgin Mary until we read the inscription that is the legend to this wall painting, which is just above her head, which says, so Nubian inscriptions usually start with the cross, then we have Greek word Hagia, which means saint, and then we have numerical cryptogram, we have a letter Rho, Ni, and Beta, which if we would substitute it with the value of this letter, it would be 152, which is equal to the sum of letters from name Maria, okay? And that's why we can read this numerical cryptogram as simply as Maria. So it's Hagia Maria, Mater tu Christu, Mother of God. This is really, I don't know, maybe Sergei can say something about it. This is really something that we didn't expect to find in Nubia, but it also, again, in my opinion, shows the creativity of the regions that in mainstream, let's say, research are considered peripheral, but they were not peripheral. There were core areas for some other areas as well, and they were intellectually, theologically, really creative. Okay, so here are the close-ups of the wall paintings. Here is Jesus blessing, and probably he is holding a chalice in his hand. Here is the ancient God, Ancient of Days, but at the same time, Ancient of Days is depicted here as Christ, because at least in Nubian art, only Christ has the cross in the halo around his head, as you can see also in the lower picture. One other amazing wall painting is this scene. You can see Archangel Michael, who is also, you see the legend for this figure, spreading his wing in kind of protective gesture. We have probably King David of Makuria, and Christ sitting on a cloud, and the king is kissing the hand, holding and kissing the hand of Christ. This wall painting is associated and rather accompanied with an inscription, which is a prayer for protection of the city, probably the city of Dongola. That's why I identify this king with King David, who in 1272 attacked Egypt and started the steep decline of Makuria. he attacked the city of Aithab. He slaughtered all the pilgrims on their way to on Hajj, on a pilgrimage to Mecca. He killed governor. Then he attacked the city of Aswan. We need to bear in mind that he attacked Mamluk Egypt. The Mamluk army at that time was the best army in the world. Best equipped, best trained, the strongest, powerful, the most powerful military in the world. And he attacked them. So in 1276, the Mamluks decided to reciprocate those attacks, and they conquered Makuria, sieged and seized the city of Dongola. And in my opinion, maybe this prayer and this wall painting was executed just before the Mamluk, or maybe during the even Mamluk invasion in 1276. We can see the king. King David, he escaped from siege of Dongola, but then was captured and died in Cairo in captivity. You can see the hand of the king, and he is kissing the outstretched hand of Jesus. But I wanted to draw your attention to so-called horned crowns of kings of Makuria. You can see it consisted of a cap and with a cross over it and two horns. But at the end of these horns, we have two little birds. One here and the other one there. So I want you to remember that. So we started to dig this trench on the east. We had to stop because we found another building. We started on north side, and we found the tiniest church in Nubia. But so we decided to excavate the southern part, just next to the staircase, and we found yet another church. Both of these churches, this one on the north and this one on the south, were located on the first floor of a building. We haven't excavated deeper yet, so we don't know what was under the church on the ground floor. Here you have a movie. And actually, except the archaeologists and the audience of my lecture yesterday in Cleveland, you are the first people who are watching this church that was buried probably for 700 years. So this is the outer wall, the southern wall of the great church of Jesus. Here you have the entrance to the church. Only one column is preserved, which is quite striking. And I don't see much space to place actually the other column, but we'll investigate it. As I told you, this church is located on the first floor, so I expect that we are missing the floor of the church here, because maybe the vaults that were on the ground floor simply collapsed, and it caused the fall of the entire floor here. So the builders of this, I don't know what's happening. The church was decorated with wall paintings. Now we have like 8 shelves, which are 2 meters long and half a meter wide, filled in with pieces of wall paintings. You can see some of them here in the apse. There was a row of apostles, and maybe we can have a look at those. Wall paintings. So on the south wall, unfortunately, the church is preserved up to about 1 meter high. I don't know if it's clear, but here we have traces of red shoes, kind of shoes of a pope, Catholic pope at least. Here we have a painting that was executed on the south wall of the great church of Jesus. Here is the standing figure of archangel. I I expect that it's not clear to you, but this is a spear that this archangel holds. Here is a traces of a person that was probably under protection of the archangel, and among the, I think there are maybe not 1,000, but several hundreds at least of pieces of painted plaster that we really meticulously collected from the midden of this church. We have found a piece that is a piece of a painting of a king. You can see this is probably the cap of the king. This is the cross over the cap, and this is the end of one of the horns of the crown, again with a little bird sitting on at the end of the crown. So now we know that a king, maybe even the same king, was painted inside this church. We'll do really a huge jigsaw puzzle, and we'll try to reconstruct as much as we can from decoration of this church. But we found this church just a week before the end of our excavation, so we really didn't have much time for the research on the spot. The painting inside the apse is kind of typical for Christian art in the Nile Valley, the row of apostles, but I would like to draw your attention to, I would say, maybe not sense of humor of Nubians, but when you look that the first apostle has those red bands on his white cloak, he wears black shoes. The one that has black bands right here and wears red shoes. So, and then again there is one in black shoes and red shoes. In the middle there was probably a wall painting of Virgin Mary, but it is very badly preserved. And you can see, so between this part of the decoration of the apse and this part, there is a space of like 30 centimeters, but you can see that the state of preservation is absolutely different. And this is stunning thing in archaeology, that you have objects that can be separated by like 20 centimeters and they look completely different. One deteriorates and the other one looks like new. What really strikes me in this wall painting is that you can see some kind of drips of paint here. And I wonder why they never cleaned it. Was this church decorated in some kind of haste, or I don't know. So for the sake of comparison, here on the left we have two largest known churches in Nubia so far. This is the church of granite columns that was considered the cathedral before we found the great Church of Jesus, and this is the church discovered in Faras. So the great Church of Jesus is really the great church because it's like 3 times larger than the other known churches in Nubia so far. Just for dessert, I would like to share with you some highlights from our work that was aimed not on medieval period, but later early modern period. So I think it was also in 2023, we have found a letter of King of Dongola, of Kushkush, King of Dongola. This king was known only from kind of oral traditions and legends that were collected at the beginning of 19th century by Sudanese scholar in a book called Tabakat. So it was a book with lives of saints, of Muslim saints of Nubia, and this king was mentioned there, but we didn't have any proof that he ever existed. And our letter simply proved that proves that he existed. We can date him to the early 17th, very early 17th century. There is also a lot of wonderful moments for us as archaeologists, because we changed our attitude to local communities. Now we are doing research together, and when we shared with them that we found this letter, it turned out that some families that claim that King Kashkash was their ancestors are still living in the vicinity. And they were so grateful. They, for instance, offered us a goat, and we spent a lot of time discussing it. And this fact that we found the letter encouraged one of the members, one of the descendants of King Kashkash, to write a book about history of his family. He finished this book, but unfortunately he died because of dengue fever last year. Another person linked to, we found out, we met those persons when we found the letter, is one of American journalists, a New York Post journalist, Ismail Kushkush, who is also descendant of King Kashkash. So you can see how archaeology can link societies. Oh, this means that I have to finish. Quick, okay, real quick. Thank you, Mark, for this. Okay, so one other. Okay, I don't have much slides left, but so in 2023, we also we have found a hoard of silver objects, 35 silver coins, and 2 silver bracelets. The weight of it is about 1 kilogram, so more or less 2 pounds. So you see that the objects from so-called New World found its way to Nubia in, let's say, early 17th century. Of the artifacts that we have found in Old Dongola, and they were brought from different parts of the world, okay? We think that, or at least 20 years ago, we thought that globalization is like 20th century's phenomenon, but you can see globalization in Middle Ages here. That we found beads from India, pottery from China. We have coins from Bolivia and Mexico, wood from Central and Western Africa, and a lot of artifacts that were brought to Nubia from Europe as well. We have also found something really mind-blowing in the right-hand, in the upper right-hand corner. You have a Judeo-Arabic letter, which is written in Hebrew script, but in Arabic language, which was found in Dongola. And in my opinion, what is quite intriguing, it was found in the mosque, on the stairs, in the stairway of the mosque. But in my opinion, it proves existence of Jewish communities in 16th, 17th century Old Dongola. And these little pieces on your right are seeds of tobacco that were also found in Dongola. And according to Mohammed Nasreddin, our archaeobotanist, this is the first evidence of tobacco from archaeological excavations in the world. And it is quite early, because we date these seeds of tobacco to early 17th century. Okay, everything that we have done was possible thanks to my wonderful team that worked with me for several years in Old Dongola, starting in 2018. It was really an enormous effort, because within our 5-year-long European Research Council project, we spent 2 years in Sudan. Every year we stay there for 4 to 6 months, and thanks to those people I can present those amazing finds. Thank you very much.